After the multi-billion-dollar acquisition of his first company, Raj Singh wanted to return some of that good fortune to the world. So he follows his heart and takes on an audacious mission.
I read everything I could get my hands on. I met with venture capitalists who were investing in healthcare. I met with private equity firms who were investing in healthcare. And almost all of the people I met with said, don't do it. Do not do this. Universally said, don't do it. Technology entrepreneurs do not do well in healthcare. That was the general feeling.
Hello, welcome to A Change Mindset. I'm your host, June Love Young, and this podcast is about what it takes to push through fear and face change head on. We'll learn from change agents who've led extraordinary transformations in their life, their work, and the world. I hope their stories inspire you to be the agent of change your life deserves. This is A Change Mindset. Well, hello, agents of change. Welcome to episode 4 of A Change Mindset. I am so glad that you're here. You, yes, you, I'm talking to you. Thank you for tuning in and for subscribing to this podcast. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right there, right next to the, yeah, that's it. Yep. Good. Thank you for doing that. I'd also like to take a quick moment to say thank you. In the last episode, I asked you to, if you would be so kind, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcast, and you did just that. Thank you so much for doing that. Your feedback has been so kind and generous. Let me share some of the ones here. Mark says that there's something new, different, exciting, and revelatory happening with this podcast. I tend to agree. KT Pally says, I'm a huge fan and hope others jump on the change train. Me too. B. Jones says, love what you are doing. This is just what I need to hear. Oh, B. Jones, that's just what my team and I need to hear. Makes us so happy to hear from all of you because we are doing this podcast not for advertisers, not for clients or prospects. We're doing this for you. And so thank you. Thank you for sending us feedback. And we hope that more of you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcast. All right, on to this episode. To start us off, I want to pose a scenario. Picture this. You have this idea, this vision, and with everything inside you, you feel compelled to pursue it. But when you talk to others about it, everyone basically says, nope, won't work, you will fail. Sound familiar? I believe this is one of the toughest kinds of change to lead. A change that involves pursuing something that everyone else thinks will fail. What does it take to push through that fear of failure and the pressure of external expectations? That's what we explore in this episode with Raj Singh, who I believe is one of the most unique, most inspiring CEOs in the tech industry. Raj is the co-founder of a company called Concur, which was acquired by SAP in 2014 for more than $8 billion. After this incredibly successful acquisition, you'd think Raj would take it easy for a bit, right? But he doesn't. In fact, he decides against all odds to tackle one of the most complex problems in America, healthcare. This led him to his current role as CEO of Accolade, which is this incredibly innovative company that's trying to fuse together healthcare and technology to help people live their healthiest life. If you haven't heard of them, check them out, Accolade. I've known Raj for many years, and the thing that stands out for me about this man is his sincere desire to help people. He just cares about people. He lives this out as a dad, as a CEO, and as a community leader. You might recall that in early 2020, Seattle was one of the first cities in the United States to be hit with the devastating effects of the pandemic. Well, during that time, Raj led a grassroots effort called All in Seattle to provide emergency funding for families and small businesses. They've raised over $30 million so far. This guy is the real deal. He is an agent of change who is out to change the world. Let's jump right into my conversation with CEO of Accolade and all-around amazing human being, Raj Singh. Take me back to early childhood. Try to remember a time when you had to accept like a big change when you were a kid.
One of the things that my parents did for me as a child that I didn't appreciate at all as a child was introduce change on a fairly constant basis. If you go back with me, they're first generation Indian immigrants. Our first house was 800 square feet, and they had 3 kids in there plus us. And when my dad got a better job, he worked at the same company for 30 years. But when he got a better job at that company and he could afford a little bit nicer house in a neighborhood with a better public school system, we moved. And there was no family conversation about it. He would just come home one Friday and say, we're going to move. Your mom's going to pack up the house. We found a place and you'll be in a new school on Monday. Now, back then, June, it's the Stone Ages. When I was a kid, if you moved even just 3 neighborhoods down, you never saw your friends again, ever, right? It was just another place. And so we moved probably 6 times from the time I was 5 years old to the time I was 17. And every one of those moves introduced this change that I began to realize, look, I don't have any agency in making the choice as to whether we're going to move or not. That is clearly my parents' decision, and they're not consulting me. But I do have some agency around how I take advantage of these opportunities. And I'll be honest with you, the first several times it happened, I was miserable and mad at my parents. But I began to look at those opportunities as opportunities where you got to start all over and define who you were. It's kind of like when you go to college, you think, okay, well, I can be the version of me that I want to be now because none of these people know me. And I think I learned that lesson pretty early. Yeah, I think all of us have these childhood moments that somehow change is introduced to us. I'd like to think that the change that was imposed upon me in those situations was relatively benign compared to some other people's experiences.
I don't know. As a kid, though, your whole life changes. As a kid, your whole world is sort of who I'm playing with after school, or
That's exactly right. Who's your best friend? Yeah. I can tell you who my best friend was at every one of those schools for sure.
And then you cross it off. You move on to the next one. Who's going to be my...
Yep, never going to see him again.
Oh, so sad. I hear you. I feel you. So you know that this show is about change. And I ask each of our guests to talk about a particularly difficult change that they've gone through. What's your change story, Raj? Where does the story start?
I was the co-founder of a company called Concur, where I spent 21 years in that role, where you and I met. And after 21 years at Concur, I feel like I had grown very comfortable in a very positive way. I have nothing but joy looking back on that experience. Decided after we sold Concur that I wanted to go do something new, but specifically that I wanted that new thing to have a more profound human impact. And so I was a technology executive entrepreneur who made a leap. And the leap I made was to get into the healthcare business. And as you might imagine, June, it's been fraught with ups and downs. And it's been certainly there's been plenty of change in the experience.
Did you consider other arenas, other industries besides healthcare as you were thinking about your next move?
I was lucky enough to be doing it with some people from Concur who decided they wanted to go do something else with me. And we looked at 2 things. We looked at clean technology and we looked at healthcare.
Both would have that human impact.
You got it. And we looked at both and we thought healthcare was closer because healthcare is oftentimes purchased by employers. We thought it was closer to our strike zone. And that's where we focused. It has been everything that we thought it would be. Very difficult, anxiety creating, and super fulfilling.
Where did that call come from? This call to do something that would improve human lives. Where did that come from?
I think I knew very early in my days at Concur, and Concur had its own ups and downs. And so we didn't know it would be successful. But by the time we got to a place where we thought this is working out well and it will have a positive impact, or it'll have a positive outcome in terms of opportunities for our employees, opportunities for our customers, and return. Right when I knew that, I thought the next thing I do has got to pay back some of this good fortune. You're lucky anytime you get to build anything, June, you know that. And so if you build something that has an outcome like Concur's, where we got 25,000 customers, 25 million people that we served, and an $8 billion outcome, you owe the universe something. And in my view, this next part of the journey was about repaying the universe.
You know, when I was working with you at Concur, when you were the president there, people referred to you as I think the term was the spiritual leader of the company, or at least like the cultural leader of the company. You were the heart and soul. And so in many ways, you were investing in human lives, in improving lives, the lives of your employees, your partners, your customers. But it sounds like that wasn't enough for your next adventure. You wanted something more.
First of all, I think you're exactly right. I look at the Concur experience and I feel honestly blessed to have been able to be a part of 4,000, 5,000. By the time we left, it was 4,000 or 5,000 employees, people's lives. And they touched me as much as I touched them. I think the next turn of the crank really is, I believe that there are systems like healthcare in the United States, and there's plenty of other work to do, that are fundamentally aligned to deliver poor outcomes in moments where people need the most help. And I thought, wow, how, this is the entrepreneurial mindset as well, June, because somehow entrepreneurs have a tendency to delude ourselves to believe that we can make massive change in tractable industries. Healthcare needs reinventing. And I thought, why not us? Why not give it a shot? And to me, that would fulfill both needs. Could I work with people that I loved? Could we build a culture that mattered? And can we then turn that into value that could change the way healthcare worked? To me, that was the mission 6 years ago.
Honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around where you were at after you walked away from Concur. You had just sold the company and you were set financially. You had already created a legacy you're very proud of. You could have just hung out, but instead you end up tackling what's arguably one of the most complicated, hairy, as you said, intractable industries on the planet. Tell us about where you were at in that moment. How did you decide that?
Leaving Concur after the sale was very emotional for me. And, you can't work on anything for 21 years without having this component of my own sense of self was in those hallways. And so when you exit an experience like that one, for me anyway, there's a roller coaster of emotions, but mixed in there is some depression. You're sad.
Yeah. You were grieving in some ways, right?
It's gone and it's not coming back. And so much of how you define yourself is embedded in that. I think in many respects, I was going through that grieving process and I was sad. Now, here's the good news. It turns out that having all of your sense of self embedded in where you work, not a great idea. And so by experiencing, this is really my second job. I've had other jobs, but I had one job for 21 years. Now I've had this job for almost 6. It turns out that you learn something about yourself as you make this change, and that your sense of self has to be internal and driven by the people you love in your family and around you, and not by the place where you work. And so it was a net positive for me, but there was some grief, and that grief led me to this burning desire. Like, I got to find the next thing that makes me feel that way.
Yeah.
And I think I learned a lot along the way, June, but that was what was really driving me.
I was a wanderer, a luster of such space. If hills could talk, they would tell me of their peace.
Walk us through the process of you actually deciding that healthcare was going to be the thing.
Between Concur and starting at Accolade, I spent 9 months studying. And so I read everything I could get my hands on. I met with venture capitalists who were investing in healthcare. I met with private equity firms who were investing in healthcare. And almost all of the people I met with said, don't do it. Do not do this. Universally said, don't do it. Technology entrepreneurs do not do well in healthcare. That was the general feeling. But you know what happens, right? People keep telling you you can't. And then you think, well, you guys don't know who you're talking to. Clearly we can. And so we did a lot of study. We then decided somewhere along the path that we'd be open to, maybe we're going to start our own thing, but maybe we'll be open to other opportunities. And so we opened the door, the aperture to, hey, if there's an interesting company out there, we're kind of coming as a package deal, but if there's an interesting company out there, we'd be interested in digging in. And I, by the grace of God, I think it actually showed up. And we got really lucky that a company like Accolade was out there and that they were open to the idea of some technology guys jumping in and running a healthcare company.
Why were they so adamant that tech entrepreneurs can't be successful in healthcare?
I think there's maybe a couple big buckets of challenges. The first is oftentimes in technology, we're seeking to automate and we're seeking to build things at scale that can work for 100 million people tomorrow. People who grew up in technology like me tend to have a desire to create a one-size-fits-all solution that scales and that often includes automation. Healthcare is a human experience. When someone sits in front of you and says you've been diagnosed with cancer, there's no automated experience that can help that human being in the way that they need to be helped in that moment. And so that's part one of the challenge. The second part of that story is healthcare, people talk about it as a $3 or $4 trillion ecosystem in the United States, but it's really regional. There is no national healthcare system in the United States. There's a healthcare system in Seattle and there's one in Portland, or there's sets of them in Portland and there's sets of them in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. And so your solutions fundamentally have to account for regionally how healthcare is delivered in those markets. That's very complicated and most people don't have the patience for it. It requires a lot of capital. All of those things are reasons why your traditional tech-only strategy doesn't work. And it hasn't worked in healthcare up to now.
So everyone was saying, don't do this. It's going to fail miserably. What made you think it wasn't?
June, I think when you assess a challenge, there's equal parts courage or fearlessness and humbleness. The courage is, I believe if I work really hard, I can assemble a team. And if you assemble enough talented people, I fundamentally believe there is nothing you can't do. And I think we can put a team together and we can do almost anything. And then there's a degree of humbleness that I think if you approach it with enough humbleness to say, look, I'm going to have to study, I'm going to have to be a student, I'm going to have to listen to people who know more than I do, and that I'm capable of being humble while being courageous, I think you have a shot. I'm a firm believer that there's almost no unsolvable problem.
I love that. Tell us about the fear. What was the scariest thing in those early days?
Oh boy. Once I had jumped and made the leap to Accolade, I had, no shortage of 100 times where I thought, oh my God, I've totally screwed this up. One of the things that happened right away, within about 3 months, we lost our biggest customer. We only had 5 customers or 6 customers. And so represented like 30-40% of our revenues. And I think your fear is, well, number one, when you run a business and you're recruiting people, you're asking them to leave something to come to you, to come to your business. And they're sacrificing some level of safety and security from where they are to come join this early stage company. And so the fear of screwing up other people's lives is always profound for any entrepreneur with a heart. And so that's part one of the story. Part two is, you're right. I just had a 21-year run where things went well. They didn't always go well, but the story will get written that was a great run. I think you'd be lying if you said you don't worry about oh my God, what if the last thing I do is a just utter disaster? What will people think of me? And I think that is a part of the narrative in your brain that's going on as well. And maybe most importantly in that story is what, and this is ultimately what kept me going, is what message am I, how does this play with my family, with my kids? And at the time when I started at Accolade, my kids were 12 or 13 and 11. They're a big part of the reason that when the going got hard, tough, I just kept going.
Why?
I wanted my kids to see me battle. And they were too young at Concur to really understand the battle. And I think I want them to understand life is a battle. And I wanted them to win, lose, or draw. I wanted them to see me fighting the good fight and fighting for something that I believed in. And none of this is coming easy to me. It's not going to come easy to you because life isn't easy. But if you battle, you got a shot.
On these banks of clay, carved by waves and sunny days, I sat beside you. It was all I needed.
When you're coaching your leaders, especially those that you see have, the runway to move up, how do you work with them in context of change management, change leadership, taking risks?
June, a part of this is made easier by the stage of our company. You don't join our company without some bias towards risk. And so there's an element of selection, the natural selection process. That's part one of the story. Part two, I think risk, and particularly inside of a corporate entity, we're 2,200 employees now, is all grounded in trust. Ultimately, we have to feel safe. And if I feel safe, I'll take risk. The best coaching I think I can deliver to a leader in our company is how much I value what they're doing for the company, how much I believe that their instincts are good instincts, and that if I can create an environment where that person feels a level of safety and trust, they're going to just be themselves and go do the crazy stuff that I want them to do. And by and large, that's proven to be true.
Yeah, I hear more and more people talking about psychological safety in the workplace. Is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly it. If people trust that you'll have their back, they'll do anything for you, but they need to believe it, and you need to demonstrate behavior that shows it.
Yeah, it's just a fancy way of saying, if you mess up, I'm not going to throw you under the bus.
Correct. And if you do it right, like if you mess up, maybe we'll celebrate your success, your failure, and all that we learned from it.
Yeah.
And your courageousness, your willingness to take those risks.
What I'm hearing you surface here is perhaps this connection between change and failure. What do you think?
1,000%. 1,000%. There is no meaningful change that you'll introduce to your life that won't introduce opportunities for failure that will cause you to question whether you made the right decision or not. And I firmly believe that those moments of, oh no, did I do the right thing or not, are moments where we're growing. Like you're feeling pain in that moment for sure, but you're growing. You're growing because you're learning. You tried something that you didn't know if it was going to work or not. And I think, regardless of how old you are, you're supposed to keep growing.
How does Raj Singh, executive leader, define failure?
So I'll give you failure in the negative connotation. I think failure in the negative connotation is quitting. I can't stand giving up. Failure in the negative connotation is not learning. I can't stand laziness, and the unwillingness to learn is laziness. Failure in the positive context is I learned some extraordinarily valuable lessons that I can now apply in my life in a way that I didn't have before. And if I'm really good as a citizen of this company and this team, I'm going to give that lesson to everybody so they don't have to learn it. You and I both have kids. How many times have we tried to teach them a lesson that they had to go learn themselves? I like to think as in corporations, people are more willing to oh, okay, I saw you do that. I don't want to do that. And so I think in the positive context, it's the opportunity to learn and the opportunity to teach others.
Lead me down to beside the river, warm my bones, scare the ghosts in the light. I will go down to the river, rid my lungs of these heavy sighs.
What is your message to your younger self?
I think the lesson I learned between Concur and Accolade was that my sense of self-worth and my sense of value had to be more germane to who I am as a human being and what I'm trying to achieve broadly, not inside the four walls of the company I work in, but broadly in terms of what's the impact I hope to have on the human race. And that starts with your family. I should have learned that lesson sooner, June. I should have learned that lesson sooner. I think it would have simplified some of my decision making. It would have I would have been more crisp in the way I thought about what I needed to do. And so that would be the lesson I tried to teach my younger self. He probably wouldn't have listened though.
What would you say if one of your kids came up to you and asked you, Dad, what's the legacy that you hope to leave behind? How would you answer that?
Personally, my best legacy will be the 19-year-old girl and 17-year-old boy growing up to be the best version of themselves. I just dropped my 17-year-old off at his first day of senior year of high school. And so I'm a little emotional today. So those two being the best versions of themselves and happy, man, I can't do better than that.
Let's talk a little bit about Accolade and the changes that are ahead that you anticipate. What's kind of the big change that you're wading through in this moment?
Healthcare is a $4 trillion ecosystem that doesn't want to change, June. And what the pandemic created was a window to open that says, let's remove the regulations that keep us from getting virtual care. Let's create more access to care for people who need it. Getting access to care is a crisis in this country right now, right? If you live in the inner cities or in a rural community right now, it could take you 60 days to get to a primary care physician if you can find one that's taking patients. Our capacity to get to the other side of really virtualization of healthcare and really turning the capacity to deliver high quality care using data and using technology, but retaining the humanity. That's where we are. That's where we are in our journey. And I think that here's the really positive news. The market's catching on and starting to buy that way. Consumers are understanding it. Corporations who pay for healthcare are understanding it. And so we've piece by piece been assembling these capabilities. We think we're about to really turn a major corner in terms of our capacity to deliver personalized healthcare.
Last question. Imagine a person who is wanting to pursue change in their life. What is your advice?
My advice, the first is be intentional. Have a plan. Know what you want. And if you don't know what you want, wait until you can suss out what you're after. But be very intentional. Have a list of the things that you want to achieve by making the change.
Just like you did with entering healthcare, you knew what you wanted.
Bingo. I think you have to be intentional or life will randomize you. I think the second is you have to be courageous. The willingness to do this, to do whatever it is that introduces significant change in your life. That courage means an understanding that you may fail, that what you're trying, whatever this change is, may fail. And the way I always think about it, June, is you have to sort of swim down to the bottom and look at failure and say, okay, if that happens, am I going to be okay?
Yes.
And I think once you can look at it and say, boy, that'll be really hard, but I'll live, then you're ready to go. The third point is be humble. When you introduce major change in your life, there's a likelihood that you won't know all the answers and you don't know right from wrong and that you have to learn it. And I think if you go in with the learner's mindset, whatever it is you're trying to do, that you can be courageous and humble at the same time. And if you're intentional, courageous, and humble, I think you got a shot.
Well, I can honestly say that you are a person that I experience as being intentional, courageous, and humble, Raj Singh. And I appreciate that. I really appreciate about you, the way that you lead companies and the way that you lead your family.
Oh, thank you, Jim. That's very, very kind of you.
I feel these waters curling over, curling over, curling over me. I lost the shoreline and faded out, faded out, faded out to sea.
Coming up, we reflect on this change story and how you might apply it to your own life. Reflecting on this conversation with Raj Singh, I think about Raj's decision to enter a whole new field, a new industry, healthcare. He, of course, has the passion and the drive and the proven track record for success, but the feedback he receives from all around says, don't do this. Tech entrepreneurs don't succeed in healthcare. Failure is the likely outcome. But a risk taker at heart, Raj decides to do it anyway. To the voices saying you can't, he says, oh, it will be extremely difficult, but I believe we can, and I believe we need to. This is how he responds. Well, let me ask you this. When your path to change is blocked by a fear of failure, how do you respond? Do you fight? Do you flee? Or do you freeze? It seems to me that a change mindset requires some fight in you. If you really want to pursue this change, but feel paralyzed by the fear of failure, I would say pause and get clear on a few things. Like, what are you fighting for? And why does it matter to you so much? What are you willing to lose or endure or accept to get there? And also, if you do fail, what's the worst thing that could happen? As Raj says, swim down to the bottom and look at failure and ask yourself, if this thing happens, this thing that I'm most afraid of, if it happens, will I be okay? And if the answer is yes, then maybe you can go for it because you know you can make it through regardless of the outcome. So agents of change, I leave you with this. Fear of failure is an all too common obstacle to change. So pay attention to how you respond when this paralyzing fear has you in its grip. I would even say make friends with it. Befriend the fear of failure so that when you are faced with a difficult change, you can anticipate it, understand it, and make brave decisions accordingly. I think it's okay to have fear as long as fear doesn't have you. Until next time, go in peace. Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Change Mindset. If you want to be inspired to lead change in your own life, head over to achangemindset.com, where you can find more resources, tips, music, and a place where you can share your own change story. And please follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your pods, because you do not want to miss the amazing episodes coming up. A Change Mindset is brought to you by Zoom Communications with music by Towers.